It was pure fight for survival at that moment and at that time. And I remember telling my mom, don't worry, I'll figure it all out. I'll work hard like I always do. I'll be okay.
Welcome back to Execs Who Run. As always, I am Jason Hunt, and in the show we share stories about life, leadership, and the miles in between. Today's guest is Mia Farrow. No, not the actress, but a woman whose real life story is nothing short of incredible. She grew up in war-torn Serbia, or Yugoslavia at the time, ran to escape the chaos and dreamed her way into a new life, first in San Francisco's investment banking world, and now as a mother of three and endurance runner based here in Sydney. What makes this conversation truly special is Mia's openness. She shares her journey with stunning vulnerability through war, immigration, burnout, motherhood, and a return to the mountains, with a pretty amazing solo speed attempt on Aconcagua, one of the 7 suburbs. This episode runs a little longer than usual, but trust me, it's worth every minute. It's inspiring, raw, and a powerful reminder of what's possible when you refuse to give up on yourself. So let's dive in. Welcome along to the show, Mia Farrow. How are we doing today?
Thanks, Jason, for having me. I'm doing really well.
It is good. As a quick kind of warm up into the show, which we do with everyone, I want to hear about your last training run you did, whether it was today, throughout the week, whatever it was. Tell me what it was.
My last training run was just yesterday, about 45 minutes, just an easy run, enjoying being back to running after a big project finished. So, yeah.
Yeah, which we will definitely get to in this conversation. Where is your kind of go-to running location? Where do you enjoy running at the moment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I run around Cooper Park typically, just close to my house.
Okay.
Or I run towards Rose Bay by the water, or sometimes I end up in Centennial Park. But most of the time I kind of stay locally here around where I live, or go all the way to Watkins Bay on my long runs. But yes.
Yeah, beautiful. For those not in Sydney, those are some pretty scenic, idyllic locations, running plenty of water views and Sydney Harbour views. So, and Centennial Park, which is my spiritual running home as well. I do a lot of my running in Centennial Park, so I know it well. Well, we have a lot to dive into today because you have a fascinating background. Already a little bit of a snippet in terms of a project that you've done recently, but I want to go all the way back to kind of where things started and probably pretty pivotal parts of your life. I don't know if people have picked up that there's an accent there. You're not an Australian, even though you're here now, and you grew up in Serbia, though at the time probably wasn't called Serbia. It was probably Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia, correct.
Yeah, I want you to tell me about that, because you were living in Yugoslavia, and the fact that it's not Yugoslavia now is probably a bit of an indication that it was undergoing some pretty, I guess, life-changing and experiences for you and your family at the time. So can you just give me a bit of an insight in terms of what it was like growing up in a country that was essentially going through war?
Yes. So I was born and raised in Serbia, in a very small town, maybe 10,000 people. Born in a family of 5. So mom and dad, I have a twin sister and I have an older brother. And yes, we grew up in old Yugoslavia that had 7 republics. And my childhood was lovely and pretty carefree and fun up until my teens, when the republic started to secede. So we got in a lot of civil wars, and we had refugees coming then to Serbia. Serbia was the capital of Yugoslavia, Belgrade. And so most of the people would come back to Serbia during wars or after the wars. So probably during my teens, between I was 12 and 21, we went through 3 civil wars that lasted 2 or 3 years. It lasted a lot longer, but I would say the crux of it, was kind of in that 1 to 2 years. And it just really affected the way the country was developing, right? The money was put into, say, education or building new things, or say we never had a sports center like in my town because there was never any money invested in that. It was invested in, maybe sending people to wars or taking in the refugees and building the refugee centers for them and where they were going to stay. So we kind of missed out on a lot of, I wouldn't say essential things in your teens, what I see kids, go through these days and have an abundance of. And just that safety and peace wasn't there to begin with, right? And fearing for maybe your life or your dad going to the war front and things like that, them losing jobs, the country going through major changes with, not having the imports and exports with other countries because we were at war with other republics. So that impacts everything, your whole life, right? Food that you're receiving, that you're eating. So life was very, very simple. And we grew up not being able to ask our parents for much, like saying, oh, I need new shoes and I want to, basketball, or I want to go and do track and field, or, there was none of that. Those were not even options for kids in those circumstances. So yes, we grew up living a very simple life. If we had a basketball court, it was in cement. It was pretty ruined. We didn't have perfect basketball hoops, but we did play basketball. We played soccer on fields, not necessarily on these beautiful soccer fields. Or, in retrospect, I look back, I played basketball for 12 years. How much damage that has done to my ligaments, or maybe not, I don't quite know, playing on the cement versus in a nice, gym they had in like our capital city if someone went to play basketball, right? And I don't know if you remember, I think Djokovic posted a photo when he trained in one of the building has exploded, and it was like this big, like a dug up hole where he played tennis. And that's how he grew up. So he's 10 years younger, right? So this is how he grew up, playing tennis, literally in these ruins. And that's how I grew up. And I remember even elementary school teacher saying, oh, we should all go for a run. And we had nowhere to run. We didn't have, the teacher would say, oh, the track will be built there eventually, right? And you see this dirt and rocks and stuff in this spot, and now you have to picture that's like track. And for many years we couldn't run there, and then eventually we had a good year where we could just run on dirt. So they kind of just turned it into a track field, and we would just pretend that we were running, because kids still watched Olympics. We were exposed to sports, and we still wanted to achieve things, right? And I was addicted to watching, Mike Powell and Griffith Joyner at that time. And, 400-meter runners were Carl Lewis was, huge. And that's all we did. We just wanted to race and run and train. And that's kind of how I grew up and what we did. But that didn't stop us. I think what was really nice is that even the teachers were they were quite positive. They would say, go and play. Let's go and run. We'll go and, get our times, regardless if it's dirt road or a really nice track, right? So it was fun. And I didn't know any different, right? So when I moved to the U.S. later in my 20s, I remember I was almost in tears. I have tears now almost. Just thinking, seeing the track for the first time and how beautiful it was. And it was it's so special. So it's, it was, and I still enjoy, I still feel that, I don't know, power going to the real track. It feels so special for me to show up and, you want to give it your best. I don't take it for granted, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So
it's pretty cool for me to see the kind of the passion and raw emotion. Obviously people will be listening to this and not seeing this for themselves, but that you have when you're explaining that, because it is real and visceral. I can kind of get it through a screen.
Yes.
What was it at the time that, because you're growing up and you're watching all these athletes on TV and you're so keen to get out there doing it yourself. What was it about running or about getting out there that was so engaging, interesting for you at the time?
It's a simple sport on the outside. When you look at it, you don't need much. I mean, you need a pair of running shoes. I had my brother's running shoes, for example, I handed down to me. But most kids would have some sort of shoes, like you see even in Africa. So kids are either barefoot or have some old shoes on, but you could still run, right? And then, you just needed a shirt and shorts. It didn't require, like, tennis was an expensive sport, say, or basketball, you needed a ball and things like that, right? But it was just simple, and it was freeing. Like, everybody could do it, I think. Like, the fact that, we had an entire class of kids could just go and run, I think it's just great. And then, of course, once you start running, you will get that. I mean, I was quite competitive, I have to admit, as a kid. I just wanted to get better and better. Then you go, oh, can I be better than my sister? Or can I be faster than this person or that person? And I think that first initial thing was that we could all do it. There was no barrier to entry, right? And the potential was, if anybody could start, anybody could end up, this way or that way, right? You could possibly get better and really good and, compete and kind of, do it.
Yeah.
So
when you got into it, did running end up being quite a big part of your life growing up or through high school, that time of your,
Yes, it's always been a part of my life. Looking back, okay, so my parents never owned a car either growing up. And I think that has impacted us. I thought negatively at the time as a kid. We would think, oh my gosh, we're so poor, we cannot have a car. And, I was ashamed of it. But now I look back and I think, what a great thing. How amazing was it that my parents didn't have a car? We had to walk everywhere or run. So as kids, we actually ran. So mom would say, okay, go to the store, and I need this, and that, and someone needs to go. And we would race. And so my sister and I would say, okay, how long is it going to take you to go to that store? Because I did it in like 5 minutes and 10 seconds. So it kind of became this addictive little, exercise, running to the bus stop to go to school or things like that. So that was like fun running, right? Because I didn't really have the structured running in school, or I didn't have a coach. That was kind of like the first phase of my running experience. And then, of course, through basketball or soccer or any sport. Those were the Serbia national sports we all played. So running was an important component of it, of course, right? So whoever was fastest could get the ball and, play the most in the field. So that was important. And then later in my teens, I got into running purely to decompress from all the study and the work that I was doing, I remember, in school, because it was the only way out of the poverty or out of these wars and just this destructions in my country. And I felt like, okay, well, if I could get straight A's, be valedictorian, go to a really good uni, I could probably transfer somewhere around in the world as an exchange student. We only had money for one child to be schooled abroad, and that was my brother. He was older. And I said, but I'm the same. I'm really good, and I'm good, in school and basketball. And they just said we couldn't. But so my city decided to sponsor me because I was a good student and a good athlete, and sent me abroad. That was later when I was 19. But that drove my whole kind of approach to sports when I was then 10, 11, 12, 13, building up to the 19, because I wanted to be recognized for various things and different sports and accomplishments that, I thought were important for this, part. So I started running with my dad a little bit to decompress after school, and my dad was a runner, and it was a great time with my dad too. Right, sharing the quiet moments, and he was a quiet person, and I always appreciated he would come with me, right, after full days of work and all these worries and everything. he said, yep, let's go. We just lace up our shoes and go and do it and not talk, just run for 45 minutes to an hour, come back, feel good. And I think it helped him in some ways during those hard times, to kind of process things as well. And then that kind of led to, okay, we're feeling a little bit fit. Let's sign up for a few events. We had little races, not really organized international races, right? I don't think our home country didn't do anything on that level, but like local races, for people. So we would sign up and do half marathons together and build to like a marathon length. So I was already 16, 17 at a time. Yeah, and that kind of one thing led to another. And yeah, I was then sponsored and off I go. I was in the US, as an exchange student, early in my 20s, yes. So it was a building point. It was fun. We kept it fun. And then, kept adding goals and using it to ultimately get to the higher goal of me maybe having a better life, somewhere else, which, yeah.
I want to pick up on something you said a bit earlier, which was you saw that as your way to get out of poverty, get out of the situation that I guess you and your family were in, and even maybe that the country was in, given the state that it was going through at the time. Where do you think that came from? Because these conversations and you hear these stories in different contexts a lot, but what do you think it was the kind of innate thing about you as an individual that meant that you had that drive and that was something you wanted to work towards? And how did you even come up with that in the first place?
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like everything really starts in your family or in your small circle. And my mom and dad often talked about, we didn't really talk about that we didn't have the money, but the kids could feel it, of course. I mean, we knew what was going on. We grew up with a lot of love, which kind of like really overrode the other things that we didn't need, but we knew that, we couldn't buy shoes and things. So I think it was, as a kid, you're just constantly feeling like, I just want to have a better life. I want to be able to afford shoes for myself. Or if you ask your parents and say, I want new running shoes, or a new running outfit or anything like that, right? They would say, well, we don't have the money now. And, your brother will give you his shoes, or I don't know. It was always something along those lines. And I think, if you hear enough, I always thought, well, maybe if I do really well. And it was, rewards based. Let's think about it. So if, say, one of the times I finished the half marathon, I was the youngest girl with my dad, finishing up, I got a pair of shoes. That was the reward back then, and it was I was so hooked, so it was little things like that. And I thought, oh, geez, so if you do well, so this is the thought process, right? Okay, so if I do well, maybe I get more shoes. Maybe I get an outfit. Or maybe, I was like, because money wasn't, we wouldn't be getting any, prize money or anything back in the day. But it was little things like that. And, it also come from school. Okay, if I study a lot, I'll get straight A's. Or, it was just the pattern of reward system, right? But I've kind of noticed, and I said, my brother left when he was in high school, and I thought, I was very competitive with him. I think that's the bottom line. And I wanted to be like him. He was a great example. He was an amazing athlete. He was an amazing academic, student. And I wanted to be like him, which was good. And so he left to the States, and I said, I want to end up there. I'll do anything, that I possibly can do, to get there. And it was just a driving force. And I wanted a better life. It was just such a simple fact, that I just wanted a better life.
And so you spent some time in the States as a kind of 19, 20-year-old on exchange, came back, finished off your studies, and then found yourself celebrating your 21st birthday in a bomb shelter.
Yes.
I can't say that I've ever heard that before. I can't say many people will have had that experience. Was that the kind of moment where all of this had kind of built up to going, all right,
Yes.
something else needs to happen here?
Yes, definitely. When I look at those, what we call pivotal moments, I think that was definitely one of them. It was such a, it just shakes you up so much. And, you just wake up and you're like, okay, I will not live like this. And this was such a good reminder, like bad, but really good. Like, I just told my parents, I just cannot stay here. This is not how I want to live life. And it's something that you had no control over, right? And all you can do is just really see how you react to these situations in a way. And yeah, so it caused a lot of people to, I mean, this was the third war, and this was probably the most intense one because it bombed my entire town to the ground, my university, the bridges, everything just blew up, and everything was just gone in front of my eyes. And I've had this experience of being an exchange student in California and seeing what life could be like. It's such a contrast. It was shocking. And then trying to make a decision to, again, leave your parents and your sister and all your comfortable, this is the place where I grew up still, regardless of what was going on, and try to make a living, go back somehow. But, I didn't really have the money or the savings or anything to go back. I did have the host family who just said, okay, let's figure it out. Let's see how you can come back, but you're going to have to start your life from zero. I had a small backpack of clothes. That was all I've had, like literally tiny little backpack. I told my parents, I have to leave. I want to lead a better life, and I think I can do this. And it was pure fight for survival at that moment and at that time. And I remember telling my mom, don't worry, I'll figure it all out. I'll work hard like I always do. If I work hard and I'll save money, I'll pay for my school, and I'll send you guys some money, I'll be okay. And I just reassured her. I remember I gave her a hug and left. And she gave me, I believe I had $20. It was $20 for a cab ride through the active war zone, by the way, to Hungary, to get to Budapest so I could fly out. And in Budapest, I had to stay for about a week to wait for my visa for the US because the host family was sending the paperwork. And it takes time. It's a process, right? And I got to Budapest and I stayed with one of my cousins there. I don't think I had much to eat, or I remember going for long walks around the town, the city, and just waited for my visa to be approved. Out of 31 people that were waiting for visas, I was the only one that got granted because I had all the paperwork from the host family, the intricacies of financial support and this and that they vouched for. And I left Budapest and I started a new life in San Francisco. I was 21 and $7 in my pocket after all has been said and done. But yes, and I didn't speak English really. I mean, I spoke some English, but this is not, it wasn't good enough to write papers, I had to go back to uni and finish up my degree. And I was a law student in Serbia, so I completely switched my degree to business. So yeah, it was very difficult, but it was a start.
It's an incredible journey, and it worked out pretty well for you.
Yes.
And the hard work paid off, and for your sins or otherwise, you ended up in investment banking in the States.
Yes.
A interesting career to go into, and totally one that makes sense for someone who was clearly bright and ambitious and whatnot. But tell me what that was like, because it's a pretty ruthless place to be working. I imagine, in fact, at that time as a female, that probably was even worse.
Correct.
But on top of all of that, it would have been just such a contrast to the world that you'd just been living in. You're going from a war-torn, poverty-stricken country into San Francisco in the States in investment banking, the complete antithesis of that, right?
Absolutely.
Tell me what that was like.
And absolutely spot on. Well, in between me starting investment banking, I think I had 4 or 5 years of just finishing up the degree, working on my English, making some money because I put myself through school. And then starting with Merrill Lynch Professional Services, just getting my foot in the door, so to speak. Yeah, just figuring out. I thought, okay, I need to see what area, which part of the bank I would like to work, right? And I didn't quite understand what professional services did and, the investment management side. So I just said, okay, I'll give it a year. Let me see if this is for me. And if it's not, I'll just move on to a different part. And investment banking was extremely difficult to break into, right? I mean, you had to be an Ivy League student pretty much, right? Male and coming in with maybe some connections already. So, because it was such a cliquey industry. But the pedigree was very important, right? Well, I kind of went in thinking, when I kind of experienced the Merrill Lynch and working on the floor, and I kind of thought, oh, this is not really for me. This doesn't really it was quite boring for me at the time too. And I mean, it's not a boring job. It's just I didn't enjoy it personally. And then I started talking to some of the people that were working on investment banking floor. And, I just started having coffees because I had a few friends who were in the industry and they were telling me all about it. And I was just like, please don't go in. It's so harsh. It's hectic. You will be in the office, 23 hours out of 24, sleeping on the floor. This is your first 5 years. But the upside is that you can make enough money to have savings and, to maybe use it to, start a different career or start something by yourself later. It was a good springboard for other things. And I thought, that's okay. I can work hard. I'm not afraid of working hard. And what do I have to lose? I really didn't have family around. I had very little friends that I made in school, but, people kind of come in and come out of your life. And I thought, what a great way, maybe to just make money. And, and that was my goal. My goal was to just make as much money as I could in a short amount of time, doing something super interesting that would keep me, involved. And maybe I'll just get out of it in 10 years, maybe 7 years. But I always give myself, I believe in 7 to 10 year blocks. So you go 5 years, 7 years, and then 10 years and reevaluate. And I said, okay, let's see what we can do. And I started interviewing. And I had a lot of luck because I have an interesting background and they kind of always, they noticed I was a hard worker. I went through a lot. They probably also the same way looked at it. Okay, she doesn't really have the family or anybody infrastructure here. She'll be working really hard, right? Because she'll really appreciate, anything we give her. And I did. And I was a quick learner and I didn't mind putting in the hours. And it was great. It was a great fit. Out of 320 new people that I've hired that year, this company was based in New York. We just had an office on the West Coast in San Francisco. I was the only female in this cohort of 300 young men. So, and I was a little bit older. So they were all 21, 22, I reckon. And I was already 24, I would think. So they saw me as maybe a bit older and she won't be causing trouble. And that was it. I was in. I was working hard. It's a love-hate relationship like with anything, obsessive goals and things that we did, I think, when we were younger in our 20s. I don't know. But I enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. It was hard, but it allowed me to have a life. And, I could move into my apartment and I could send more money back home or, I could buy shoes and I could afford things that I couldn't afford back when I was younger.
Yeah.
Yes.
Were you still running at this point?
So yes, I continued. I used it again as a bit of a, way to distress. So I was running to the office because I had to be in the office quite early by 5 o'clock, I think 5:30. So I would run early in the mornings. And San Francisco was just beautiful to run around any time of the day. And I felt quite safe being in a big city. I don't know, I never really thought about, not being safe. I loved it. And it was hilly as well. It was interesting. It had a lot of architectural, like different buildings and things that I was always exploring on the way to work. So it was fascinating for me. It was beautiful.
I'm assuming commuting's the only time you had, right?
Yeah. Yes, pretty much. And then anytime they would give me like a weekend off, like we would close a big deal, they say, okay, go relax for a day, right? And I'm like, yay. Turn everything off. Oh, we had a BlackBerry at the time, right? I would turn it off, put it away, and I would go all day and like run and hike, in the hills. Oh, San Francisco is just beautiful to explore and run. And so I did all of my long stuff on these kind of, days off as much as I could.
Now, take me through how that 5-7-10-year block ended for you then.
Yes. So my goal, I was always honest with that goal, with myself. I never really communicated, I don't think, to my boss or anybody. But after 7 years, might have been 8 or 9 at this point, I was just burned out. And I was starting to I was feeling comfortable with life. Like I had savings at the time. I was feeling like a person in the U.S. because I got my citizenship by that time and had a bank account. I had medical card, all of these little things, right, that kind of make you a person in a new country, kind of were ticked off. And then I started talking to one of the guys from the research office, and his goal was to climb on 7 summits. And I said, you're going to do the 7 summits? My eyes just popped. And he's like, you know about the 7 summits? I said, of course I do. I grew up hiking and mountaineering with mom and dad. And, this is, it's just a dream of everybody, isn't it? And he laughed. And he was from New York, moved to San Francisco. He's like, it's not Mia. Not everybody knows about 7 summits. But anyway, so that's how it all kind of started. I guess I started thinking, I was like, oh, it would be fun to go. I actually can now do these things. They used to be just these like such big dreams and big never reaching goals, right? For me as a kid, it's almost like going to Mars. Absolutely impossible for my parents to maybe, afford one of these trips. But I thought, oh my gosh, I can do that now. And it's funny how like sometimes small conversations can have such a huge impact if they happen at the right time. And for me, I was already in that lull thinking, okay, how do I get out of this industry I had no direction. I didn't know where to go and what to do. And after that conversation with this friend, I was like, wow, maybe I could do one of these things. But then I thought, I need 2 or 3 weeks for this, and then I need to train or prepare. So I thought, gee, I really need either a different job or to quit the job altogether and maybe take a year off or take 6 months off, and then rethink things. And that's how it all started. I thought, we didn't really have, we did have Google, but I don't think I could do much on the computer at work because it was all protected. We didn't have access to a lot of browsing at that time. But I started looking into, and I found out this article that talked about a gap year. I was like, maybe I can do that. Maybe I could take a year off and then just do the climbing, the marathons, and whatever I wanted to do. And then I did. It was perfect time because in 2009, the GFC happened, and it was a good time to exit the investment banking industry. So I kind of went on a high, so to speak, right? Got my last bonus. I said goodbye. I'm just going to travel the world and do this, and they were fine. So, and that's what I did.
And that kick-started everything for you? Was that kind of the moment where running was now kind of the main focus for you?
Yes, running was back in my life, so to speak. He's like a good friend, that waited patiently, and it was so easy. He picked it up right away. I knew what to do. We just started running, training, adding mileage. And then kind of planning my trip. And as I planned the trip, I kind of planned it around the marathons around the world. So I had a marathon in Rome in Italy, and then I went to Serbia to visit my dad. We ran a marathon in Novi Sad. And then I went to Paris to visit a friend from school, and I ran the Paris Marathon. And all of that was also good training then. Then I said, okay, maybe I can run a marathon each continent. And that's how the Mount Everest Marathon popped up on my map. And I remember planning with my dad, and he said, this will be great. You're going to love altitude running. I said, how do you know? You've never done it. He's like, it's mentally challenging. It's hard. You're going to love this. You're going to have to problem solve. I said, Dad, I have never been at 5,000 meters. I don't know how I'm going to react. And he's like, no, this is going to be great. Anyway, so I believed my dad, and I did it, and I absolutely loved it. He was right.
Tell us more then. Tell us more about the Everest Marathon.
It was great. I arrived to Nepal in May of 2009 and spent 2 weeks training, a little bit kind of pre-acclimatizing for the event. And I have the luxury to do it, right, because I was just traveling that year. Unlike the many participants that were coming and just had 3 weeks scheduled for the trip, And it's beautiful. Nepal is just, it's just a special place. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to see the Himalayas and the whole range. Something that I have dreamed of as a kid. It was incredible. And just to be there, not even to do this Everest Marathon, which, is always the highlight, but it was very special. And to send photos back to Mom and Dad, they were so proud. It's just a special moment for me. And anyway, so the Everest Marathon happens around the first ascent of Mount Everest on the 29th of May each year. And this was the second year of the event. So it wasn't really all that well organized, but we were all there, about 150 of the international runners and several groups that had to trek to the Everest Base Camp for 2 weeks. Then you spend the night in the Everest Base Camp, and then you run down to Namche Bazaar. But it's not running downhill. It's up and down and up and down. They call it the Nepali flat, right? It's constant. It's a hilly course. That also wasn't really marked. And back in the day, we didn't have GPS, and all the watches that will tell you go left or go right or, stay on, you're on the course, I had, I think, a Timex was, at the time, a little popular, just a little digital watch. Anyway, it was so exciting. And then you get to meet the people that actually, sort of do the same thing and value the same stuff in life in general, share similar values, and everybody had this joy about doing it. You get to meet, we had a soccer team from India there, like 30 young men that were like super fit too doing it, and their coach who was coaching everybody how to breathe, for example. So I learned how to breathe on this trip. I didn't know that you could like inhale on the right side or the left side. You could, kind of warm yourself up or cool yourself down, and it was just fascinating for me to learn these little things. I'm all about skills. I love skills and gaining new, like little tiny skills that help you in life. Yes, it was just fascinating meeting, like we had a NASA researchers in 3 of them in, this one tent, and like, talking to them about their job. It's just brilliant, right? So the only downside to this trip was that some of them didn't react well to the food that we had. It was very simple food, right? Rice and water, and every once in a while you have meat. But, back then, what am I talking about now? 16, 17 years ago, we didn't really have a lot of gels maybe, and all the little packets now that we, powders that we all bring to our trips and everything. So I had nothing. Back in the day, I even had a summer sleeping bag because I was so cheap to buy a very expensive sleeping bag for this trip. So it was a very simple trip for me. I met so many incredible people who did incredible things like events, ultras, and I was always fascinated to ask them about their habits, right? What they were doing, like nutrition, training, their whole system, right? Families, how they balanced having kids and, or partners and doing so. I was very curious at the time, and I wanted to learn. And yeah, the Everest Marathon was just amazing. It started in the base camp, which is just such a special place. And back then, it was empty. It was not this little village that we have now with queen mattresses and coffee shops and everything in the actual base camp, which is, I can't even imagine. It was just completely empty, just a few tents, avalanches everywhere around you, radios, saying, oh, sadly, we just lost 3 people in this avalanche. And you're thinking, oh my gosh. And they just, people just have to carry on and do their thing and stay focused. It was, it's terrifying. When we started the marathon, there was just a lot of, because we spent two weeks getting to know each other with all the participants, right? There was a lot of talk and kind of joking around who's going to win and, who's going to do well. And I had some Germans, in the tent next door, and I was Serbian. So Germans and Serbian go way back, right? They're not really kind of friendly to each other. And they kind of made a remark about something which really sparked this, like, no, I'm going to show you. I'm Serbian and I'm going to do, and I just kind of took off. I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that like had such an impact on me, but it does. I kind of grew up with that. And anyway, so I just took off, and I remember getting to Tengbocham Monastery, and there was a little group of Nepali people who said, you're in second place. I was like, what? You're in second place? It's so awesome. And I was here with this lady from Canada who was turning 50, and she's like, do you mind if I tag along with you? Because they put the map of the marathon on your back. So you kind of had to, if you were getting around these monasteries as your cross points, you had to but they put it on the back, and I didn't want to take my shirt off or anything. So we were kind of like, okay, we're getting so close to the finish line. Let's not mess up the path, and let's, okay. I said, let's go. I said, we're in the second place. I said, awesome. I said, who is ahead of us? And they're like, the 23-year-old, from the U.S. I said, gosh, we got to get her. And anyway, so they gave me this Gatorade, I think, or something rather, to drink. They're like, here, have this. I said, great. And I remember I just took off as a rocket. I'm now starting to think that was like Red Bull or something else that they gave me. But I took off as a rocket up this hill, and I passed this girl. Her name was Katie, and I said, oh, hey, Katie. Kind of like, I'm so fresh. Look at me, it's so bad. But I just said, no, I know, but I was also happy to see her in a way, it's like 7 hours already in. And I said, hey, Katie. And I just took off, I remember. She was really struggling. She was going slow, thinking probably she's close and she doesn't have to rush. And then I was like, oh my gosh, where's Beverly, the lady who wanted to tag along and come with me? And then she was kind of right behind me. I was like, great, you're here. This is good. Let's go. And then we just took off from there. It was incredible. And finished. So we were the first international women to finish, which was really cool. What we didn't realize is that we had about 100 Nepali people join us on the day of the event. And a lot of them were going in. I didn't know this had the prize money, attached to it or anything. I thought it was just an adventure race for fun.
Right. Yeah.
So they all came, and of course they won. I was the 5th behind 4 Nepali women. And because I was taller than Beverly, my foot stride was longer. So they kind of claimed, I was the first one to finish, but it was really joint. Beverly and I finished first as internationals. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Runners. So that was fun.
That's
and they
so
kind
cool.
of, it was very special for me. And I called my dad immediately and I told him. And then it was really hard to share with some friends and people that I sort of had in San Francisco, because I didn't even know how to explain. It was such an unrealistic race, so to speak. And they're like, you were just an investment banker. I just won the
Everest Marathon, yeah.
I know, how do you really say it without sounding, So I never really talked about it until much later. But anyway, it was fantastic.
Well, I'm glad that we're here to talk about it now.
Yeah, thank you.
A pretty amazing story. So obviously you're completely given up on going back to investment banking, and you were going around and running the world, doing pretty epic events like this.
Yes.
Then I guess the next stage of your life came about in motherhood and
Yes.
becoming a mother, and another massive change, I guess, to the running that
Yes.
you were doing and going, oh, right, I've got some other people to look after now.
Yes, it's quite interesting. Hey, not only that I started motherhood, I also moved to Australia from
Mm.
the US, where I've just, created life and lived for 15 years, which then completely rocked my boat. And I felt, again, I had to start from scratch, right? I had no work permit, no Medicare, no, you just feel like a complete stranger in a country again. Yes, you'll speak English. I had to learn a bit of Aussie language too. But yeah, so it was a huge challenge. And yeah, Guy was already 47 when I met him, and we talked about families and having children, and we just moved really fast, really quickly. When I moved,
Mm.
that was it. I was sort of pregnant and having babies for the next 6 years.
And did running have to take a bit of a back seat for that time?
Running did, yes. And sadly, this just sadly, yes, when we were trying to conceive and have babies, I had a few miscarriages, and doctors at the time thought, oh, maybe you're doing too much. Maybe you're running too much, or maybe you're exercising too much. And it was kind of, they would link it to that and not to other things, or maybe stress, moving to a new country, being here by myself and things like that. And I wish I had never really given up on running. And I wish I had that. In retrospect, I wish I'd continued, because it was a huge 7-8 year gap between me stopping and then restarting, which is a long time.
Yeah, right.
It's a very, very long time now. But at the same time, I continued. I mean, I stayed very active, even with babies. I walked a lot. I pushed the stroller a lot. I walked everywhere I could possibly walk. I walked around Centennial Park. I got to know Centennial Park really well that way too. All the beaches, anywhere and everywhere I could go and put, I was there. And so that was still good. I continued to swim, which was good, and do Pilates, of course. But it's different from running. I missed running.
Yeah, crazy that they decided running was the problem, because I imagine you would have been a bit older at the time anyway, and obviously conceiving when you would have been in your late 30s, or
yes, late 30s.
So
35,
that in itself is in itself can be difficult, and then they go and blame you running. That seems a little bit.
I know.
I'm certainly no medical expert, but that seems a bit crazy.
And it's kind of
to me.
my best friend. When someone attacks your best friend, you're like, what? I can't run? What? I was so sad. Yes. But I tried anything that, could help. And the interesting thing is that I said, okay, I'm not, I won't run for a month or whatever, 2 months that, the doctors wanted me to stop for 6 months. And I said to Guy, okay, well, if I can't run, then we'll have to go and climb or hike. Because that was kind of like my other outlet and something that I really enjoyed, I was passionate about. And he's like, great, let's go climb Kosciuszko. So we did. And I literally found out I was pregnant with Jackie then, just after that trip, shortly after that trip, which made me so happy. That was my first child. So
perfect.
Yes, it was
amazing.
Really, really good.
And you have 3 lovely children now?
Yes, 3 girls.
Yeah, amazing. So that big period off, what was the kind of, I guess you were probably missing running, and bringing up 3 young kids probably makes it a little bit harder to have that time. But what was the point that kind of got you back into running again?
My mom and dad came out to visit to meet my last baby. Sophie was born in 2017. And then I was breastfeeding still at the time, each baby for about a year and a half, which is a long time. And during my first and second, when I had the first and second child, I decided not to run. I actually didn't have the energy at the time. And I think the reason why I didn't have the energy is because I wasn't running or doing the things that a little bit were something that I enjoyed. And this is kind of like that effect of once you stop, you just, yeah. So when they came out, I felt like I had a help, and I said to my mom and dad, what if you stayed with the kids at home and I went for a little run? I just felt like, I did have a nanny, but I used nannies to kind of separate the girls so I could spend more time with each girl one-on-one. Because with 3 kids, it's really hard to give each child the attention they deserve. And I really cared about quality time with them. And they were all developing in such, the speed of light. And I just felt like I didn't want to miss out on things. And I wanted to give everybody the attention that they needed at that very particular time. So the nanny was there so we could kind of divide and conquer. And then when my parents came over, we had even more help. And I thought, gee, what if I left 3 kids with all of them and I could actually go for a run?
I'm going to go for a run.
How fun would that be? Oh my gosh.
Love it.
And it was so good. I was so hooked. And Dad said, yeah, absolutely. Just go. We'll be fine. Oh my gosh. It worked. Oh, it was just the best feeling. It was so good. I was so unfit, of course. I couldn't do much, but just to be out, it was so freeing. There's so much joy and freedom in it. I can't explain. Only a runner would probably understand, but it was amazing. It was amazing.
And what was the first major event? We're going to get to your last challenge in a second, but
yes.
What was the first event that you kind of got back into?
The first event, I'm trying to think. I believe it was what is it called? The event in August that goes from the city to the beach. Cities to Surf. Is it city? Yeah, City to Surf.
Yeah.
So I think that was, the event. Because Guy could be on the street with the kids, and my parents were still, they would come kind of every year or every other year to visit us for 3 months. And Guy had one of the kids in a baby Bjorn, I think. And I think that was my first event. And they met me, I don't know what kilometer that is, maybe 7th kilometer in Double Bay from the city, or 10, I don't know. No, it's 17 in distance. So anyway, halfway they would meet me right down on the street. And they waved to me. And the fact that kids could also see me run and just participate in an event, it was so special to me. And
cool.
Just to see them cheering and saying, go, Mom, yes, you can do this. And yeah, it was really good. And then, of course, I was hooked. I was just like, oh my gosh, I can do this. And then what do you start thinking about the first event? It can take 2 or 3 minutes for next time, And then you start planning a little bit, right? How do we do that? And how do we get better? And all the things that you have to do and adjust. So it was like a slow shift and slow movement because there's a lot of moving pieces now, right? It's not just me planning these events and my training. There's a lot of now people around me that I had to take care of and fit into all of this. So
yeah. For sure. And you did some pretty cool events in that time post that as well. You went over to Slovenia and did a trail race over there, and you did Ultra Trail Kosciuszko.
Kosciuszko, yes.
We started the podcast with a bit of a snippet into some interesting challenge that you've just recently done. So we should probably talk about that. I'm not going to give any insights. I'm just going to let you tell us about your last adventure because it's pretty amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Oh, so I decided to climb one of the 7 summits as I was getting fitter, of course. After my first run, after having Sophie, I started putting bigger goals on the page, and I decided to climb one of the 7 summits, Aconcagua at 6,962 meters. And that was kind of just a natural progression to where I left off before having children, because 6,000 was my last mountain. And I also did a speed ascent on Kilimanjaro, and previously was the Mount Everest at 5,000. So it was a nice progression, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. That's at least how I was thinking. And so I'm
not sure if that's how all logical thinkers think.
Right.
It's pretty crazy,
thought,
but
okay.
I get it.
Yes, why not? So I thought it's just combining two of my big passions, running and mountains. And I thought, okay, well, let's see if I could get fit for Aconcagua. And I had 9 months to get stronger and fitter in, running wise. Before the trip, I was feeling really fit. I was, running a lot. And I was like, maybe I could run this mountain as well. So I started Googling and looking up and, typing in saying, is there an ultra somewhere near Argentina, near Aconcagua that I could do, or a marathon, so that, I could make the most of my 2-week trip when I go there. And one of the posts by this girl, Sunny Strower, came up and it said, I have just did a speed ascent running from the bottom of the mountain to the summit, down, and then around, connecting the gates. And I said, wow, so she did it, so it's doable. And I said, let me research, and I sent her a message, and I said, oh, hey, Sunny, I just saw your blog and read, and it was amazing. And wow, how incredible that you did this. I said, is this possible for anyone, or is this very challenging? I just didn't know what level of an athlete she was and how difficult this was. And she said, are you trying to break my record? And I said, is this a record? And then I didn't know. And a little bit of competitiveness in me kind of showed, and I was like, it's a record. So I was like, oh, I didn't know this was a record. I was just wondering. I have 5 days extra in Argentina. I was just being, very honest, and I don't know if I can do it after an expedition. And she said, sure, take a look, go for it. And I said, okay. And that was it. And I shared it with my coach at the time, and I was probably thinking, my gosh, this is so crazy. Here's a woman, we have 3 months to just train, just to summit, okay? And now we're adding this like 110-kilometer event to our post-expedition event. But he was so nice, and he said, yes, let's do it. So I was all excited. So this is a speed ascent on the longest route on Aconcagua, and it's 110 kilometers long and about 5,400 meters elevation gain. So you start at 2,000 meters to 2.5, and you push solo by yourself all the way to the summit overnight at nighttime, to the summit of nearly 7,000 meters, and then you have to come on the other side of the mountain, and then you have to connect these 2 main gates. And I was like, great, how good is this, right? It was all very different when I showed up and I started the expedition with my team. It was raining, it was hailing, it was cold, and I thought, this is never going to happen. This is just not fun, right? The first day on our expedition. After that day, the weather just completely changed. We had sun every day. We summited in 7 days, which is pretty record time for, 8 people on a team. We had a great leader, Julian Inseralde, who is also my friend. And as we were on the summit, Julian was telling me, okay, so now when you come to the summit by yourself, when you're doing this run by yourself in 3 days, you're going to go down that way and go, to that path and around. And, he was trying to tell me where to go on the other side of the mountain. Well, I said, oh, great. It was just so overwhelming because it was another 75, 80 kilometers to go all by yourself, navigating through this rough terrain where the path is not all that visible. And I said, okay, great, I can do this. And we got off the mountain. I had about 3 days to rest at that time, and that was not enough. Now we're at 10 days of me being at high altitude. I had 3 months of training, coming from 8 years of not doing a lot of training. And I'm like as excited as a kid in Disneyland, right? And I'm like, great, we can do this. So you have like about 25 kilometers to run through the valley to get to the base camp at 4,500 meters. At about midnight, I fell into this big river. It was midnight. The river was so loud at nighttime. Somehow I got out of the river. I got to the base camp. It was 4 a.m, which was okay. it was so cold. I had a little bit of food, put another jacket on, a few layers, and I just continued on and went to Camp 2 and I got to Camp 3 and got to 6,500 meters. And I was feeling tired at the time. And this is the one thing that Julian said, do not fall asleep. One thing he said, the sun is so bright, it's going to be warm, just try not to fall asleep. It's dangerous. Well, what happened to me? I sat down and I was like, oh, I'm just going to close my eyes just for a minute. And I sat down and I fell asleep. And I don't know, I just kind of woke up. I think it was 45 minutes. I felt great. I was like, oh, refreshed. And I started walking again and I got to 6,570 meters and just 100 meters from that spot. And one of the porters said, no, you better turn around. He didn't speak English. You better turn around. This is it. You're late, meaning that it was 3 p.m. And the summit, that's usually this kind of limit for the time that you can summit. So you actually had to work backwards from the summit time to your starting time. Kind of like, because you could nominate your starting time. I didn't know if it was good to start at 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 10 p.m. You know, it all depends on your skills, speed, and abilities, right, on the mountain. Anyway, I got there late and I said, okay, I trust you. I better turn around. And that was it. That was my first trip. But I was hooked. I was so happy. It was 300 meters short from the summit. And of course, another 80 kilometers to loop back down to the other gate. But I was very, very happy. I could just, in a single push, I could get so close. Because 300 meters at that altitude is almost another 2 hours of walking. 2 hours for 300 meters. So I just said, you know what, that's fine. That would be 5 p.m. That wasn't safe. You had to be off the mountain. And I just said, great. And he said, the mountain will be here. They always say that. You can just come back. I said, great. and I got off the mountain and I said, oh, I had another 90 kilometers now to go back down the mountain the same way out. So that was, not 90, I had a 60. So it was total 90 kilometers that I just covered all by myself. Just at 10 days of being at high altitude. And I said, this is great. And Fernando Grajales said, Mia, you're really strong. You can do this. Like, if you come back, let's plan this better and let's do this. And I was like, this is so amazing. So I got off the mountain thinking, this was just brilliant. And this will give me so much to work on, right? Like, I was already thinking, okay, so I got to start training more endurance, up the endurance and up, the power and the strength. So work at the gym more and all these things. I could just see my whole plan for the next few years, in front of me. When I got back home and I talked to my coach and he was devastated. He's like, but you were 300 meters short of the summit. Like, you could have just finished summited, and I could just see how disappointed he was. And I thought, I'm coming off no training and on no base, and I just realized at that moment that I wanted to do this differently and that maybe I didn't need a coach, that I could coach myself. I wanted a coach to get me better at running so I could have better aerobic capacity, but not necessarily coach to help me with this specific goal, because obviously I kind of had to step aside and look at it. He wasn't at high altitude. He wasn't there. He didn't see how harsh the conditions were or, the path I had to navigate and all the, problem solving I had to do. But it really excited me. And I said it was very, very challenging. And I don't think he saw that part of it. And I don't think he understood that this was something that gave me, like, it was the light at the end of the tunnel for me. I kind of saw that I could, it was a huge motivation and this big, hairy goal that I could work towards in years to come, not just, next year, because Aconcagua is only open for 3 months in the season, like of the year. So I saw it I had to build this big system to get there. And I was very excited. So I continued to work on it by myself. And well, COVID happened, so I couldn't go the following year, which was great. It was really good because I believed I needed to work on my endurance. And what do you need for endurance? Patience and time, right? So I believed, I thought I needed to put in at least 5 years, which was just about right. And which brought me to 5 years later, going back to the mountain, feeling very confident and being stronger, having the experience. I had another trip in between these two trips just to see the other side of the mountain and work on my timing and work on the logistics, work on my nutrition. Nutrition at high altitude is completely different than nutrition at sea level. And so many other little things, like the whole system, like a family, kids, guy, keeping him inspired to continue racing and with swimming and work and keeping kids excited and with school and sports. And so, yes, in 2025, I decided to go back again, and I was successful. I completed my project. Amazing. And it was great. I almost felt like I didn't want it to finish because it was just so much fun working on the process to get there, just on the little things that I had to refine and perfect, and not necessarily perfect, but just refine and just get, that 1% better each day, and just work on, compounding all of that and keeping it moving for so many years, not giving up. The best part of this is that my kids were old enough to watch me, to process, what I was doing. And, in their eyes, they now call me a strong, brave mom. All these they come up with, these adjectives. And it's wonderful for me. And I wanted them to see that part of me that I had before I had them. And there was a little bit on pause because I was investing into them, and then it kind of came out again, and we could all be a part of it. So it just gave me a lot of joy.
That is an incredible story in so many different ways. And if we had more time, I'd love to unpack that in so many different ways. But and I'm going to give you a hard question. I promised I wasn't going to give you too many hard questions, but I love the fact that you talk about the process, and you talk about all the, 1% better every day and all those things that you need to do to be able to achieve those goals like that. And I think regardless of what we're doing, whether it's in running or if it's in life or your career or whatever, like that's such a great thing to follow. And it's, you can enjoy the moment, you can enjoy the experience and the outcome, but you've got to be present in the process to get there in the first place as well.
Yes.
What's the one takeaway that you took from that process, whether it be actually when you were doing it, achieving the goal itself or in that build up? Like, what's the most memorable thing for you out of that?
The most memorable thing is keep it simple. And it's, when I first started, it was so overwhelming because I felt like there's so many little things that I had to work on. And, just starts with tempo runs to speed, to track, right? To get all the training going, to know where to go to train, but I had this brilliant coach, running coach for a year. He just said, Mia, we're going to keep it simple. We need to simplify the process. We're not going to travel down to Falls Creek maybe for a bit of altitude running or this or that. No, we're going to hit the hills in Sydney. And he said, it's not necessary. I did one trip. I would train in the Blue Mountains a lot, but we kept it so simple around. That's why I like to train around the house, because you can do that. And we kept it simple with the routine at home. And it's not adding things, it's actually taking away things. I always tell my kids, the best skill you can have in life is learning what to ignore. And it's so important, the skill of focus. So when you're going for a run, make it close to the home and do it. Otherwise, if it's far away, if you have to drive, if you have to pack up, it's so much more difficult. You're just adding these layers in between. So whatever you're doing, just keep it simple. Recovery, it's bleak. It's not potions, it's not pills, it's not, any secret, boots and things. It's all wonderful, but it's just adding to the stress, and it's just chaotic. So just keep it simple. We're sleeping for recovery. We're eating for fuel. We're eating real food. We're not eating. So it was just that. You just keep it simple.
I love it. I'm sitting here nodding at everything that you're saying the whole time, because it's my philosophy with it all as well.
Yeah.
To the extent that I got tattooed on my arm, it's in Morse code, but it says "just go running," and it has a couple of meanings, but one of the key ones behind it is, I remember conversations with my dad, and we'd talk about training and all this kind of stuff, and the hardest part being getting past the letterbox and all this stuff and different things you can do. End of the day, just go running, right?
Yes,
just go out and do it, and
just
that it really is just do the simple things.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. So
yes,
resonated very strongly with me as you were talking
Good.
through that, which is awesome.
It's good.
All right. We're getting to the pointy end of our podcast, and one of the things I do is I get my previous guest to leave a question for the present guest. So this is also your fair warning that you need to come up with a question yourself. But the question from my last guest was, how has running changed you?
Well, I always say that I have a little saying that I say, running has to grow and evolve with you. And it has changed me as much as I have also changed my running, in the way it was very different from what it was when I was a teenager or in my 20s. But running has taught me how to be patient and just how to enjoy, simply the simple joy of enjoying the sport, being able to do it. So I had another pivotal moment when I turned 40, and I was told that I shouldn't run, and I will never be able to run unless I replace both of my hips. I was looked at by 3 sports doctors, and I was just thin, weak, and fragile after the 3 childbirths that I have given, and they just said, no, you got to keep with lateral sports, play tennis or swimming, stop running. You cannot run unless you change, we change you. I said, I'm just 40, I'm too young to have this happening. And it made me, I was so sad for 2 weeks. I couldn't believe I waited for 7 years to get back to running, and they just said that I wouldn't be able to run again. And it almost like reignited this new fight for it, and fight for me being back to running. See, it's kind of like, taking away your best friend. I was like, what? No, we're going to find a way. So that's where my whole strength work started, and getting back, and I'm so happy I stuck with it, and it was not that severe or that serious, really. But I fight for it, and I feel like running fights for me, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's just such a beautiful part of my life, and I feel I can always go back to it, and it just makes everything better, so to speak. I enjoy it.
Definitely agree with that.
Yes. I've never pursued it
it's amazing.
To an obsession point, but like harmonious, yes.
Yes. I feel like listeners, having listened to this podcast, may disagree with that last statement to some degree, but
maybe.
It's awesome. We've already got a few snippets of advice from you, but the last thing I do is to get some advice from you on life, leadership, and running. So we've not really talked about leadership too much in this podcast, because this is also a leadership-based podcast, but you had
Yes.
some leadership roles back in your investment banking days, and being
Right.
a mother is certainly being a leader as well. So
Mm-hmm.
what I would like from you is your top pieces of advice, one each for life, one for leadership, and one for running. This is one of the hard questions. I'm sorry.
This is very hard. Yes. For life, enjoy today. It's as simple as that. Just really appreciate, being alive, being able to do things, and having enough, not wanting more. For running, maybe find the middle path, not too obsessive, but not too loose. Just find that happy middle ground where you still care and you want to do well, but it doesn't disrupt your sense of self, So just don't attach the end result to your sense of self. But then as much as I want to say that that's, for professional athletes, I mean, that is kind of what that defines them. So it's a bit difficult. But yes, if you can try to balance it all and switch it off, say, you come home for dinner, you can switch it off. I think that's a good skill to have. And
Sure.
then leadership, values. Just know your values. And I think everything's sort of rooted in that, and your goals, your aspirations, that you have to define your values. Once you define your values, you'll be able to lead maybe more. Values and care. I said I would say also care. Care about the things that you do. Care about people, care about things. And it's interesting, I was reading the book by Steve Magnus. I really like him. And there was an excerpt where T.S. Eliot said, learn to care and learn not to care. Which means do care, but have boundaries too. There's a certain point where you just kind of, don't go too deep. But I think caring is being compassionate. These are the also the skill sets of leaders that they should have these days. Yeah. And knowing your values. Those are very important.
Those are some great pieces of advice. And yeah, I think people will resonate with those and be able to take them on board. Thank you so much. I've genuinely been sitting here for, we've recorded for an hour and a half now, pretty much with a smile on my face the whole time. Good. It's been amazing to hear your story, super interesting, your very authentic, real, vulnerable approach to it. It's really been awesome. So I want to thank you for that. I feel like we haven't even really gone that deep on some of the incredible stuff that you've done, because we could talk for a very, very long period of time. And I know this won't be the end of your adventures. You're certainly not an individual that will stop here. So if people are interested in following your journey, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm on Instagram, and I have a public account just for the high altitude adventures, and it's Mia _ high altitude. And my personal account is Mia _ Farrow 23, where I post more the family life and a little bit of crossover. But yes, I share the family life as well. But I always give the option just to follow the adventurous side of me. So yes, the best way.
Awesome. And we'll add those in the show notes so people can find them easily. One final little question maybe. Do you have a little adventure sitting in the back of your mind for what next might look like?
I do. I do.
You don't have to share.
Lie.
You can keep it a secret, and people.
I do. Yeah, this is just a part of me and who I am, and nothing bigger or better. It's actually, I think, smaller. But I like working on skills, and I like working on little things and perfecting that. So, yeah, I have some adventures scheduled. So definitely.
People will have to stay tuned. I certainly will be, because I am looking forward to seeing what that looks like.
Good.
Another massive thank you. Thank you so much for coming along today. I've I've genuinely really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thanks for having me. And thanks for listening to my stories.
Thank you for sticking with us on this longer episode. I know it was a bit more than usual, but Mia's story honestly deserved the time. From war-torn streets to Wall Street and now to mountain summits and raising 3 daughters, her journey is one of the most powerful that I've probably had the joy of talking about. What stood out most, though, was how honest she was about the struggles, the doubts, and the slow rebuilds we often don't see. If this resonated with you, please take a second to follow, give us a rating, comment about the episode, or share it around with your friends, because I'm sure there's someone who is working through a tough chapter or a second start in their own life, and I'm sure they will appreciate hearing this. So until next time, if in doubt, just go running.